Hey racing fans, it's Ducky Dubs Gaming back with the first real video on the channel. Today we are going to look into Forza and settle a debate. What should you play Forza Horizon 5 on? Steering wheel would obviously be the best, right? Since it's just as close to driving as you can get? Well, not exactly. We are going to be judging each input device from 4 categories to figure out which is the best. These categories are beginner friendliness, drifting performance, agility performance, and finally simulating experience. Don't worry, I know I made those way more confusing than they needed to be, but I'll go in depth on what I mean for each of those when we get there. I will give each system a rating out of 10, and at the very end of the video, we will come to a conclusion on which one is the best, or at least have a better understanding on which one is better at doing everyday things in-game. To start, we are going to look at the beginner-friendly category. This category will judge each input based on how easy it will be to just pick up and play. Since I first started on a wheel, and now play a hybrid of a wheel and controller, and all other video games I play on keyboard, I think I have a pretty good idea of how easy each of these 3 inputs are to use. Since this is the hardest category to straight up test, I will just give my thoughts on what makes each input beginner friendly. The gameplay in the background is the first time I've ever used a keyboard to drive an FH5. It definitely feels like you have a lot of control while driving, but there are some concerns I would have about keyboard being fully beginner friendly. Since you already have your fingers on WASD, or the movement keys, it makes it difficult to shift gears, the E and Q keys, whilst in a turn. So the simplified meaning of that is just we have 5 fingers and not enough to hold W, D, and E down whilst maintaining a traditional placement of your hands. This would be one of my only major concerns I found whilst trying to drive on keyboard, and this issue could easily be replaced by a change in binds, although I do have to remember that beginners wouldn't have changed their binds yet, so I do have to dock points for that. The second issue I came across was the range in motion and keys. Compare a key to a pedal of the car. In the car, you can choose to floor it, 3/4 it, half it, a fourth it, or not even have your foot on it at all. And sometimes you can be even more precise. Not in a keyboard. On a keyboard, the most precision you can get is not down, half down, or fully down. Although this doesn't seem like too much of an issue, and really isn't while it's just free roaming around the map, it might become crucial during the drift and agility category later on. All in all, I will give the keyboard a 7 out of 10 for the beginner-friendly category. Now this gameplay is going to be free roaming around on the controller. It definitely felt a lot smoother and cleaner driving around with a trigger instead of a key. Unlike the keyboard, the controller's triggers offer a wide range of motion, but still not as precise as a pedal may be. Going around turns, accelerating, shifting, it all felt very natural when doing it on the road. The controller was extremely beginner-friendly and all around accurate when performing on the road. There truly were no major concerns I saw whilst using the controller, except one small UI issue. The controller can sometimes be difficult to navigate through the menus of the game. On the contrary, the keyboard offers a mouse which you can use to click what you want instead of using the hard-to-navigate controller. Overall, this issue is extremely minor, and I will give the controller a 9 out of 10 for the beginner-friendly category. Now this one's the trickiest of all. The steering wheel is very tedious when first using it. It is extremely tricky to manage since it is very different from driving normally. Having to juggle counter steering and many more issues that were not as prominent in other inputs makes the wheel difficult for beginners. I now finally start to feel comfortable cruising around FH5 at 150 miles per hour on the wheel, which only took a couple days on the controller. As talked about in the controller and keyboard, the pedals with the steering wheel definitely offer the most precise power output due to the range of motion that the pedals offer. The steering wheel also requires focus that I didn't have to give the other 2 inputs. For instance, if I need to do a single daily challenge, and I already even have my wheel set up, I would still choose to do the controller, since I wouldn't want to dedicate much focus to a measly daily challenge. Other than that though, the wheel is very useful when using it in Forza Horizon 5, once you get used to it. Overall, the wheel is definitely the trickiest out of 3 inputs for beginners, and I would give it a 3 out of 10 for beginner friendly due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. Overall, the controller offered the most ease for beginners, with the keyboard not too far behind. On the other side of the spectrum, the steering wheel is difficult for beginners to use right away. Next, we will look at how these 3 inputs perform whilst driving in drift zones. The second category to look at is drifting. As I mentioned earlier, I first started racing on a wheel, and let's just say that this category might reflect why I can't solely rely on a wheel on the game. To test the drifting category, I'll be using the Formula Drift number 91 BMW M2 2020 on 2 different drift zones. The East Coast drift zone as well as the Las Curvas drift zones, and on each input we'll compare my drift scores. Just as a disclaimer, I don't consider myself a very good drifter, but I do still think that my scores will be valid since I did all the tests myself, so my skill level never changed. The keyboard did better than I was expecting due to low range and motion, but it felt surprisingly nice to drift. There were definitely some times that it didn't feel completely natural, but for the most part, I think the keyboard did very well. With only one try on each, I got 156,000 drift score on the East Coast drift zone, while gaining 86,000 drift score on the Las Curvas drift zone. I think these were definitely high for the first try, and I don't know how much better it would have been with multiple attempts. For all these reasons, I'll give the keyboard a solid 8 out of 10 for this test. Controller drifting performed how I imagined, or maybe even a little worse. I normally drift on the controller and I had high expectations, but I don't even know if they were fully met. I started performing mediocre whilst I think I performed well in the keyboard test. So since I had to restart a couple times due to severe mistakes I will never mention again, I am showing footage from the first time I fully made it to the end. On the East Coast drift zone, I got a total of 157,000 drift score, whilst on the Las Curvas drift zone, I received a 90,000 score. I overall feel that the scores would be similar between keyboard and controller when drifting, so they tie in this test and both get an 8 out of 10. The wheel did not perform nearly as well as the other two inputs. Now, it could be user error, although I spent nearly a year on the wheel and can never drift no matter how many tutorials I watched and hours I spent. I would constantly search online trying to learn and never could. This is when I finally accepted the fact that drifting on the wheel is just too difficult for me, and it will be impossible to 3-star every drift zone on the wheel, which is why I now drift on the controller. As previously stated, I tried to do all these things on first attempt, and that didn't go so well on the wheel, so I guess watch as the fails as they commence. At the end of the day, I got 109,000 score on the East Coast drift zone and a 64,000 score on the Las Curvas drift zone. Overall, I give the wheel a 4 out of 10 on drifting. Although this may seem high for what I just said about the wheel, I know a rare group of people that can do it, and I do think you can get at least 2 stars in every drift zone, but for me at least 3 is pushing the limits. All in all, the controller is going to be the best for drifting, with keyboard right there with it. Similar to the first challenge, steering wheel is far behind. That gives the controller a 2-0 lead in wins, although not too far ahead in points. The current scores are keyboard with a 15 score, the controller with a 17 score, and the steering wheel pretty far behind with a 7 score. The third category is agility. For this category, I'm going to be testing on 2 different custom maps for each input to really show their agility and possible input delay. For this challenge, I'll be using the 2017 Acura NSX as well as the 2020 Porsche Taycan Turbo S. Also, if anyone wants to test out their different cars or inputs, or simply just interested about the maps, the codes will be on screen now to go check out yourself. The first test will be a simple race in a town, meaning many sharp and sudden turns. This will be very informative in testing out each input's delay/agility. The second test is less important, although still notable. Since the key part of agility is being able to brake fast and start again in another direction, I will be testing how fast each car will reach 150 miles per hour and then come back down to a complete stop. I know I do keep mentioning it, but this is my very first time playing on keyboard, so some of the turns might be a little scuffed, but for the most part the keyboard performed well. Didn't receive any penalties or crashes and took the corners well. It ended off with a respectable 2 minutes, 1 second, and 650 milliseconds. Definitely challenging some of the other inputs to keep up. For the controller, it was a slightly different story. Although the turns did look much cleaner, 2 didn't follow that route. I did slightly scrape an edge of the tunnel that I think deserves a +2 second penalty, and I also hit the edge of a building which I think deserves a +4 second penalty. So although my original time was a minute 51.5 seconds, with the penalty applied, it comes out to a minute 57.5 seconds, which still edges out the keyboard in the test. I'm shocked. Genuinely shocked. I assumed the controller would have rocked this challenge and placed first easily, but the wheel actually overtook the controller. The wheel did definitely feel slow and sluggish at times, but I guess the time suggests differently. However, the wheel did hit a wall pretty severely towards the end of the race, which I thought I should keep in instead of redoing for first try sake. I think that this hit was pretty major and deserves a +5 second penalty. The original finish by the wheel was a minute 48 seconds, although with the penalty, the wheel got a minute 53 seconds. Absolutely amazing. For the second agility test, we'll see how fast the inputs from each device go through to the computer by accelerating as fast as possible to 150 miles per hour, then decelerating as fast as possible back down to 0 miles per hour. Trust me, I know that sounded a little bit confusing, but it'll make sense in a minute, I promise. As mentioned earlier, I'll be using the Porsche Taycan Turbo S. I truly am not expecting any groundbreaking results from this test, and I'm rather just expecting reaction time to skew the results, but if there are any major differences, that will be notable and important to keep in mind. The keyboard reached 150 miles per hour at 8.18 seconds and returned back to rest at 13 seconds. The controller reached 150 miles per hour at 8.17 seconds and returned back to rest at 13.04 seconds. The steering wheel reached 150 miles per hour at 8.17 seconds, so up to par with the controller. But it returned to rest at 14.01 seconds, a whole second late than the keyboard was. Wow, these results definitely rocked the boat. The first test left me in utter shock. I would assume the primary reason for the fast finish by the wheel would be on my long time using it, although I almost feel more comfortable in the controller now. I think the real reason the wheel time was shorter was since the wheel gives a more lifelike approach, and being in tight corners like that is definitely lifelike. I think in most races the controller would be faster, but maybe in tight street races the wheel could overthrow the controller. On the other test, I would say that I truly only ran it since I occasionally feel like my steering wheel has a delay, so I wanted to put that to the test in this video. It seems like that was indeed correct, and the tension built in the pedals does slightly delay the deceleration factor of the test. All the other times are very close to each other, which are just slightly skewed for my reflexes on each input. Other than that observation, I will disregard this test, but I think I should put it still in the video because it is relevant. With all things considered, I would give the wheel a 9 out of 10 on the agility test. Definitely surprised me with the results. I would have the controller close behind with an 8, and the keyboard behind that with a 7. Overall, I think that these inputs are agile and nimble, although the wheel seems to take the crown in this test. That means that win-wise, controller is still winning, although remember, the final verdict is based on points, not wins. Finally, no matter how competitive video games can get, everyone plays video games to have a great time. Because let's be real, if you didn't have a good time playing video games, you wouldn't be playing them at all. So for this test, we will be ranking each input on how stimulative it is, and how much fun it is to use the device in general. Since this category does not technically result in a competitive advantage, I think it would only be fair to rate it each out of 5 rather than 10, to make it a little bit more true to the video title. Alright, let's hop right into it. I'll give the keyboard a 2.5 out of 5 for this test, or if you can even call it a test. When you play on the keyboard, although the competitive results could be up to par, I think that you won't have nearly as much fun as you could have in the game if you were playing on one of the other two inputs. When you use the keyboard, it doesn't truly feel like you were driving, and rather playing a racing video game, which, before I get flamed in the comments, I know you are, but being a little bit more stimulating would definitely make it more stimulating in general. I'll give the controller a 3.5 out of 5. You definitely feel like you're driving a car, but at the end of the day, you're holding the controller, and it feels like you're holding the controller, and you're playing a video game all the same. This might not be such a bad thing, though. Just because you use a controller and it doesn't feel like a simulation, doesn't mean you can't have fun with all the features. The ranking is simply off how much you feel like you are actually in the front seat of a car, which is why I give it this rating. And finally, for the last rating of the video, I rate the wheel a perfect 5 out of 5. The first perfect score of the video. If you change your camera angle to the front seat view, it could actually feel like you're driving a car. Now, I'm not saying you'll forget you're playing a video game, because most likely you won't, but it definitely feels like you're in control of the car. And the other plus side to playing the video game version of driving a car, rather than going outside and driving a car, is that you can knock over as many barrels, trees, and anything else you want without having to worry about the damage. And I wouldn't recommend going outside and doing that, because I don't think it'll end the same way. Other than that, I don't think there's much more to say about the wheel. It just hits the test out of the park and is the perfect rating to end this video off. So let's talk results. What are my final thoughts? So after many hours of testing and retesting, I wouldn't say there is really just one conclusion. I think if you're a very competitive player, go with the controller. If you want to have a good time while still achieving solid results, go with the wheel. And if you don't want to bother setting up a wheel or calibrating a controller, go with your keyboard. Overall, I don't feel like any of these inputs truly are a bad choice. But for the video, there must be a winner, so here are the final scores. The keyboard ends up with a total of 24.5 points, which is a pretty respectable score. The controller ends up slightly one-upping the keyboard, with an outstanding score of 28.5 points. And finally, I think we all know the wheel isn't going to take the gold, but it tallies up to a total of 21 points. So there you have it. The debate is finally settled. The general audience should choose to play Forza Horizon 5 on a controller rather than its rivals. Thanks for watching. Make sure to drop a sub because this took a lot of time to make. And if you enjoyed, also hit the like button to show your support. See you in the next video where I will... Actually, you'll just have to wait for the next video drop to find out. Ducky Dubs out.